Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished colleague and friend John Hamry, Ambassador Wayne, colleagues, friends, partners, good afternoon to all of you. I am honored to be here to share my thoughts in this institution, CSIS, which has played an important role in global scale in regards to the situation in Afghanistan, our hopes for the future, the current challenges and opportunities. But before anything else, I'm here to thank the American people for their sacrifices, alongside our people for their contributions to peace and stability in our part of the world and to the well-being of our people, contributions in blood and treasure. I'm grateful, we are grateful. We value the partnership as an Afghan citizen, but also today as a member of the unity government. And our people are thankful to you for your steadfast commitment in the past 16 years. And recently, more so, because of the announcement of the South Asia policy by the administration, I would like to thank President Trump and his national security team in administration for the announcement of the policy. It took a little bit of time. A lot of people were anxious here and there, but eventually it came out right. And the policy consists elements that were expected, and including the ones that Ambassador Wayne mentioned earlier. Ambassador, thank you for your introduction, and thank you for keeping an interest in our situation and too many other issues you have dealt with in the past 16 years. You mentioned about 2001, 2002. That was the start of our journey after the tragic events of September 11th. And that's where the United States woke up and took the challenges as it were, rather than as it wished to be. And this has been a long journey in the past 16 years as a result of our partnership with the United States and also other friends and partners of Afghanistan from Europe and elsewhere. A lot has changed in Afghanistan. Life for millions of people have changed. Just visualize for a second the dark era of Taliban that not only they suppressed the people of Afghanistan, men and women, and especially women, but at the same time they harbored terrorists like Osama bin Laden in its networks and enabled them to inflict casualties of no scale, no limit in different parts of the world, including here in Washington as well as in New York. So those were different times, and we tend to forget where we were. And I always try to remind our colleagues, our friends and partners, that had it not been for the reaction after September 11th, the world would have been a very different place, because Al-Qaeda was striding upwards and in big deal, unnoticed to a large extent. So their progress was disrupted, then of course the nature of the threat evolved in many ways, and today we are not done with it. And I think that's that might be the main question amongst the American public, especially. And I will try to come to it in the course of today's event, because I consider it as an opportunity. During a few days of my visit here, I'll have interactions with the administration, with members of the administration. And also, I reiterate my feelings and my sense in terms of being grateful to the American people for their support and for their commitment. Before getting to the current situation, the journey I mentioned, the past 15, 16 years, it has been with ups and downs. And we have learned some lessons. And we have made mistakes. But together we have made progress. The main challenge has been terrorism. At that time, Al-Qaeda. Today there is Daesh and other terrorist groups. Not just limited to the boundaries of Afghanistan, but beyond that. And 16 years of working together, I think you have found out that in Afghan people you have a partner, and you have a serious partner, which is willing to work together, but also to make sacrifices, not only to deal with the challenges, which are the common challenges, excuse me, but at the same time there are opportunities which are not there just for the Afghans, but for the region and beyond the region. Just a few days ago, I was at the American embassy. 4th of July, mainly, I go there. When I was in the opposition, now I'm in the government, but still, I've kept the tradition. But this time around, it was for a very unique occasion. Ambassador Hugo Lawrence, which his term comes to an end these days, he had invited me there. But that was on a project for education. $70 million of US support for textbooks and teacher guidebooks. So as a result, 135 million textbooks for Afghan children in the coming 4 to 5 years. So every Afghan child will have a textbook in each subject, and every teacher will have a teacher guidebook. So this is an investment on humanity, on the future of humanity, stability, peace, and human values. This is just one example, but a very important example. While the fight between the forces of evil, darkness from one side, and the educated, enlightenment will continue. The one source of assurance for our people has been that we are not alone in this. While the terrorists join hands, how to bring tragedy to the families, to the human beings, and how to take people back to the era of darkness, the forces of human values they join hands, not just to fight against a common enemy, which is what we do, and we will continue to do, but also to invest in the future of humanity. There are lots of good stories which doesn't find traction or attraction in the eyes of the younger generation in Afghanistan, in wider population in our country, which have achievements and materialization of their rights, democratic rights, human rights, political rights, the right of participation, and altogether, since we don't have good memories of revolutions, because there was a revolution in Afghanistan, so-called revolution in Afghanistan. We don't call it revolution, we call it evolution. But in its real term, there has been a revolution in our country. In a country where education was a crime, considered a crime, and only 600,000 people under very strict circumstances were allowed to schools, only boys. Limited subjects were taught, to a situation where millions of boys and girls are going to school. Private sector has developed in the main part of our economy. An engine of growth is the private sector today. And we have experienced, we have gone through different experiences in the past 16 years, but nevertheless, several rounds of elections, not always without problems, but that has been opted by the people in population as the only way forward, rather than other ways of getting to our rights. The expansion of the role of Afghanistan from being an obstacle for prosperity in the region, turning it into an opportunity for connectivity, for trade, for transit, and exchange of goods and ideas in the region. These are changes in the past 16 years which wouldn't have been possible without your support, without your contributions. So when I say thank you, and when I say we are grateful, we really mean it. And coming to today's situation, and unity government, President Ghani and myself, are committed to make not only the US South Asia strategy, which is an important element in our engagement, a successful strategy, but also in a very interesting part of the world, and interesting neighborhood, South Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, with too many challenges and opportunities. The way forward, I'm hopeful, and I'm more hopeful today than before that we will succeed, and we will overcome the challenges that are ahead of us. Part of the South Asia policy, important elements, including the fact that it is not based on a timeline, but rather condition-based. That's very important. And when it is said that the political element is weak, I don't agree. The political part of it, the main issue there, that the aim is there that those forces which are fighting against the government of Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan will be persuaded to come to the negotiating table. And that is the aim. Well, the compact between Afghanistan and the United States, it includes elements of governance, reform that we are committed, political process, democratic process, elections, Ambassador Wayne mentioned about it, parliamentary elections and district level elections and presidential elections in 2019. The peace process, the private sector. Talking about the private sector development, while there was a period that the private sector businesses were holding back because of the uncertainty that was some years back. Now they are forthcoming. Just recently, and today, as I'm here, one of the business leaders returned back to Afghanistan to invest in a public-private partnership-based scheme, tens of millions of dollars. Energy, gas, providing electricity from gas, and now there are two examples of this. In altogether, it's worth $300 million. These are good examples. So sometimes the question comes that after all these sacrifices and contributions, why is it that the American forces are still in Afghanistan? First of all, there used to be over 100,000 American troops in Afghanistan. Now the number is much less. But at the same time, parallel to your presence earlier, the Afghan security forces were raised to big numbers and supported and continue to be supported. And as part of the security cooperation, which is also part of that compact between Afghanistan and the United States, your commitment in supporting the Afghan forces in the coming few years, like helping us doubling the size of our special forces, supporting our Air Force, in helping us with reform, and also us taking initiatives in dealing with corruption. These are important elements in the new strategy, including the regional aspect of this. As far as the region is concerned, it's also for us to interact with all the countries around us, the neighborhood, and to convince them and to bring them together to realize that if there is one lesson in the past 2 decades, that is in dealing with the threat of terrorism, that these terrorist groups have not served and will not serve any countries or any state's real interest. At the end of the day, they have their own interest. They have their own interest, which is in destruction and terror, in violence. And I think there are sufficient experiences in our part of the world that has to lead us to decide not to differentiate between different terrorist groups and cooperate in dealing with them, in working together. And that's not just for the interest of one country called Afghanistan, but for the interest of all of us. As far as reconciliation process is concerned, I have no doubt in my mind that absolute majority of the people of Afghanistan are keen to see a peaceful process. Yes, there are challenges ahead of us. And the fact that there were groups, and there are still groups that they believe that they can overcome, they can take over through methods of terror and violence, and they receive support, and they have sanctuaries. That remains to be a big challenge for us. But I have no doubt in my mind that there will be conditions and circumstances that more and more groups will be convinced that they need to join the peaceful process rather to continue an endless war. I mentioned about private sector earlier. Having one of our colleagues here from African American Chambers of Commerce a few weeks ago, we were in India and together, and there were dozens of Afghan and Indian companies, and also a lot of U.S. interest in that, working together and making deals between themselves, while it happened in a way that I was supposed to be there a day earlier. There was an attack on Kabul airport, and then the flight didn't take place. But when I got there, I mentioned that they could cause delays, but they cannot stop us. There is no doubt that in the course ahead of us, there will be a lot of attempts and efforts to stop us, to delay us. They can cause delays, but they will not be able to stop us because the cause is the right cause. So on that note, I think since I have covered most of the issues and topics, we don't need Q&A session, yeah?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, let's just for a few minutes. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Good. Okay.
Here or
yeah,
there?
Sure, sir.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. You really covered a lot of ground. Thank you for making yourself available. We really appreciate it. I wanted you to talk about the role of women in Afghan society. We had Rula Ghani here a couple weeks ago, and there's just been incredible progress. And I think a big part of the future progress in Afghanistan is going to be driven by women who are taking on increasing roles, and there are more than 3 million girls in school in Afghanistan. If you could just talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a big part of the hope that many of us have here in the United States about Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you. I mentioned about the achievements. I talked about the progress. These were not achievements or progress made by men in Afghanistan only. Women of Afghanistan were part of this and are increasingly part of this and will be increasingly part of this progress. From a situation where it was a very distant hope, like 16 years back. I remember coming to Washington in late 90s, talking to the audience here, and not being able to suppress, to keep my emotions down because of the suppression in atrocities which was taking place against the people of Afghanistan, but mainly women. Those stories of those years are not written or not told, and those have remained in the minds, in the hearts of the people, untold stories. Even today, it is hard to explain it. So, first, that situation came to an end post 2001, and then women started right from the beginning. Their main focus at the beginning was the education of their children, but they themselves also participated in the political process, in the elections, in the parliament, being part of the governance, private sector, media, and civil society, and advocacy, and just to give you an example, a few weeks ago, there is a group these are civil society networks, mainly in the women organizations. I meet with them on a monthly basis, and they keep me accountable for the promises that we make, and they keep the president accountable. And in the areas that we are slow, they remind us, but they criticize us, and they make us work harder. So that's today the fact that the mentality changed from that era to a new era, where it is realized that development of the country, inclusive development and progress, cannot take place without the rightful position of women amongst men and women in the country. That in itself is a big evolution.
Could you talk about your hopes for prospects of peace?
As a country at war in the past 40 years, around 40 years, you will find the people of Afghanistan most keen and also hopeful to have peace in their country, because we suffer on our people suffer on daily basis, big deal, one way or another. So our best hope is on the wishes of millions of people who are hardworking, who are defending their country against different terrorist groups, which are not their making, but being imposed upon them. But at the same time, hope that peace will prevail in our country. And when I talk about the situation in Afghanistan, and earlier I mentioned a country which was seen as an impediment, as an obstacle, turning into an opportunity, not just for itself, for its people, but for the region and beyond the region. If you just take the natural resources of Afghanistan into account, that could lead to lots of big things in the region and beyond. In the regional projects which are underway today, which we have not stopped because there is fighting, because there is war. We have been waited. We have laid the foundation for a country which will be connected through railways, through roads, through fiber optics, and trade, transit in electricity and power and all together. These are all dividends of peace. which the people are cognizant of, but at the same time, there are certain other factors which has to be taken into account. Those forces which are fighting against us, the terrorist groups under different names, they have sanctuaries outside Afghanistan. This issue has to be addressed.
The United States recently announced its strategy to support Afghanistan. What do you most want and hope from the United States and your other partners? You have over 70 partners who are accompanying Afghanistan. What do you most need from the international community at this time?
First of all, we appreciate the increase in support which has been announced by the United States, followed by NATO countries and other allies recently. That's important. And it has different elements which enable us to move towards self-reliance. And what we expect is, of course, continued commitment, but also, as it was mentioned by President Trump, we don't need blank check. Yes, the commitment is there, but we are also committed to make it successful by taking serious steps in fighting against corruption, better governance, in also enabling environment for the private sector to develop. And examples of, if you take increase in our revenues, that has happened while we are fighting tax revenues and revenues all together. In the midst of fighting, when it is when there are normal circumstances, that's a different issue. That when it happens in the midst of fighting, that's a totally
it's impressive.
Different. So that's our commitment, and it's not just expecting from the United States, but also from the countries of the region. There are countries that, for them, they consider Daesh as the main threat, which we also consider as a big threat, as main threat. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, there is a thinking that since Daesh is the main threat, Taliban might be lesser evil. And there are tendencies to at least to give a hand of support or minimize the
threat.
Or there are countries who consider other groups, for example, the terrorist groups which are there from Central Asian republics as the main threat. But at the same time, the dilemma is that we think that Taliban are a lesser threat. The umbrella is the Taliban for all those groups, and they cannot operate without support from Taliban. Or in the neighborhood, Pakistan considers TTP as the main threat, which we agree. Yeah. We are fighting against them. We consider them as a threat, and we don't make a differentiation between this terrorist group and that terrorist group. And we have never supported any terrorist group in our country. And we consider them the same, and those forces which are fighting. At the same time, we are open to dialogue with the Taliban. And we have kept the door open for that.
Could you imagine a scenario where the Taliban entered sort of legitimate society and there was some sort of reconciliation down the road?
Recently, one of the groups which was fighting against us, which was part of the fighting groups, they joined the political process. And now they are part of the political process. That has not been implemented throughout countrywide in a way. That is a group led by Mr. Hikmatyar. And it was in the same day there were 3 conferences in 3 different places. One was with the women organizations and civil society and advocacy networks, and which were, I learned that there were some sense of worrying among these groups, that perhaps because of we might sacrifice the achievements of the people of Afghanistan, which is symbolized in their rights, in the materialization of their rights, human rights, women's rights, freedom of speech, and so on and so forth, for the sake of making peace with this group and that group. And addressing that group, I told the audience that, look, there is another conference, there is another event in another part of the town by the leader of the group which had joined us. Isn't it better to have these debates in this town rather than having groups planning attacks, rockets or terrorist attacks? So in the course of working together in moving forward, we have this as an experience. It is doable. It's possible. And one is the commitment of the Afghan leadership in the wish, in the desire of the Afghan people, which I have no doubt in my mind.
Yes.
The other side is that I hope that on top of every other thing, the South Asia strategy would also help us to persuade more and more groups to join the talks and opt for peaceful process.
You talked about Afghanistan within its region and its place in the region and the potential. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? Because you are certainly in an interesting neighborhood. That's one way to describe it.
Yeah.
It's certainly a dynamic neighborhood as well.
Yes, absolutely. In the old days, it was even more interesting.
Yes.
There was the Soviet Union, and now 3 Central Asian republics are neighboring countries to Afghanistan, which we have good relations with them. Level of cooperation, trade,
you share border with China.
interactions.
You share border.
We share border with China. China is our trade partner.
Is it your #1 trading partner today?
Where is it that China is not a #1 trading?
Oh boy, that's a very good question. That's a good question.
And there is the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Well, with all of them, we have trade relations. And yes, of course, at the moment, the trade balance is more towards the imports, but it is changing. Beyond these immediate neighbors in Central Asia and also other parts of the region. So there are 1 or 2 agreements that we will be signing with neighboring countries, including Uzbekistan, in the coming, hopefully, few days, which will help transit. So Afghanistan is connected to Europe through Central Asia and Caucasus, and also Afghanistan used to rely only on one transit route, which was through Karachi. That's not the case anymore. That's through Chabahar as well as through what is called Lapis Lazuli route through Azerbaijan to Turkey in Europe. The Afghan people, the younger generation, which are our main source of hope. When we see their energy, their talent, boys and girls, and also resilience, as we, we call ourselves as old Yangs or something like that. When we, so our times were different. When I was younger, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, and I thought that the situation has changed, and I have to do something about it, and so did millions of Afghans. Today, there is another type of invasion. All these terrorist groups have found Afghanistan a place to turn it once again into a sanctuary for the terrorist groups, and to pursue their evil ideas. But I think the will of the Afghan people is far stronger than the will of those groups, not to let them succeed, but that turn Afghanistan into a better place for its own people, living in peace within and without, and contributing to the prosperity of the region and beyond.
And many Americans are going, I think, given the progress, and there's been significant progress, and I don't think the American people, it's not covered enough, the successes and the progress your country has made. And there's been an incredible amount of progress in Afghanistan. But in some ways, the way I think American policymakers are going to think about Afghanistan going forward is something akin to the way American policymakers thought about Colombia 15 or 20 years ago. And so the kind of engagement we need to have with you, it needs to evolve and change because of this progress and because of the increased capacity in Afghanistan. And so in essence, we need almost this is a very American and very Washington term, but we need a Plan Colombia for Afghanistan. We need both an economic and a diplomatic component, and we obviously have a willing partner. We have a great partner in you, and so obviously, and there was a renewed commitment at the Brussels conference. So I remain optimistic. I do want to come back to the question I asked you in the meeting, and you touched on it earlier in your remarks, but I think it's important for the audience just to make sure that we're all hearing the same thing, Dr. Abdullah, which is I'll have Thanksgiving next week, and many of my family members will say, I'll say I hosted Dr. Abdullah from Afghanistan, and my various family members will probably say to me, Dan, why are we still in Afghanistan? And Dr. Abdullah, what would you tell them if you were at my Thanksgiving table?
I thought that...
You say pass the turkey, right?
First of all, you have been with us in this for too long, and that's obvious. It has two sides in it.
Yeah.
First, you have made sacrifices alongside our people. You have made contributions. Your taxpayers have paid, and you are still with us.
Yes.
And lots of men and women in uniform from your country have made the ultimate sacrifice, have paid, and make sure that those sacrifices are not in vain. It wasn't that the United States decided to occupy a country thousands of miles away 16 years back in 2001. That wasn't the case.
No.
There are forces which were evil and enemies of humanity and enemies of our people, but enemies of the United States as well, who created tragedies beyond comprehension. That took you to our country. And prior to that, just to share my personal memories with you, I used to travel to Washington and try to garner support, create some attention what was the situation in Afghanistan. That was between 94 to 2001. Each year, once or twice, I would be in Washington and trying the same thing. And once I met one of friends called David Enso, which is another. I explained this story to him. That was in 2001.
Pre 9/11.
Pre 9/11, and I was saying that look, these networks are expanding, and if they control Afghanistan, then they will move towards Central Asia. They will turn back towards South Asia, and then I cannot imagine how you would be able to control it. And he listened carefully. He argued. He asked me questions, and I had a map with myself that what were their ideas and what to do. And at the end of it, with some regret, he said that, look, unfortunately, no producer is ready to put money on sending a journalist to Afghanistan and covering the story. And then just a few months from that, I had to deal, that was post September 11, with live coverage in 3 places in Afghanistan, all agencies. So these, the thing is that acting on time, saves lives, saves resources, saves opportunity.
We can pay now, or we can pay more later.
And my point is, first part related to your question for Thanksgiving was that you will not let the sacrifices of those brave men and women to be in vain. Next to that is that we have a common enemy. That's the next one. But also your contributions has not been just in military and security terms. It has changed the lives of the people. It has helped people having better, materializing their dreams. And that's part of your values. And the third part is that if you don't fight them over there, they will come and fight you here.
It's true. It's true.
That's pure mathematics.
It's pure mathematics. Could you just spend a minute, Dr. Abdullah, talking about the kinds, you talked a little bit about in your remarks about the increase in tax collections and the shorthand in Washington as the Afghans stand up, we can stand down. Talk a little bit more about this, how you're standing up, both from a security standpoint and from an economic standpoint.
First of all, in terms of security, there used to be over 120,000 American troops on the ground a few years back. Visualize the cost involved.
Enormous.
Enormous. Now the bulk of the responsibility is taken by our security forces. And you helped us raise the security forces and still supporting us. So that's just a simple calculation will give you the answer. Big deal. And also in economic terms, our resources, natural resources, rare earth materials, these are commodities of enormous significance. And the country is rich with it. The opportunities for investment, the opportunities for the countries around us to prosper through engaging with us and with others. These are the hopes and for self-reliance, and that is happening increasingly.
Dr. Abdullah, how there's certainly always been the promise and the hope of the mining sector, and you referenced rare earths. How actualized, or how much of that is potential, and how much of that is actually happening in terms of mining?
As I mentioned, there was a disruption in between because of uncertainty.
Yes.
That has affected different aspects of our life. We had one or two missteps as far as dealing with the contracts were concerned.
Yes.
But we are correcting and remedy those decisions.
Okay.
And we hope that some of the, at least, it's also part of the compact between Afghanistan and the United States. Out of the 4 big mining contracts, we hope that we move one by one in materialization. And some of the one of the examples that I gave earlier about investment in gas and turning it into electricity in terms of private.
It's very exciting.
As a private public partnership, based on private-public partnership scheme. The World Bank is involved in private sector, Afghan private sector is involved. These are the examples.
Can you, that would be actually useful, just the role of the World Bank has a very large trust fund in Afghanistan,
yes.
And the Asian Development Bank
Yeah.
has been really, from an American standpoint, we get the sense they've been a very constructive partner to
Sure.
you. Could you just spend a minute talking about the World Bank Group and the Asian Development Bank? Because
Yes.
I think they often don't get a lot of attention in these sorts of conversations.
Both are partners in helping us. World Bank has this unique role because of the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund,
Yeah.
ERTF. They are managing the fund there, so that's a unique role. But at the same time, they are also involved in big infrastructure projects.
Yes.
Connectivity
Rural
projects,
roads, yeah.
not just within Afghanistan, but within the region. For example, Kaza 1000, which is electricity transfer project that's connects Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan as the source of energy, Afghanistan and Pakistan as the receivers. And there are ADB, Asian Development Bank, is involved in TAPI, which is gas pipeline
Yes.
project, but also infrastructure project within the country.
They help build
Roads,
a ring road.
Railway projects which connects Afghanistan borders with the main cities, and electricity, and capacity building, education. World Bank has been a partner in education, and health. So it's their involvement is multifaceted.
You have 400,000 young people that come into your workforce every year, or you have a very young population. If you were thinking about the economic sectors that that you're hopeful about or optimistic about that young people will enter, what are some of those sectors that you're most optimistic about, or the sectors that you think investors ought to be thinking about when they think about Afghanistan?
Let me give you the context. In the first few years, our main efforts were focused to take children back to school, or to open the schools and universities. So that was the main aim, and that's where millions of people joined schools. Now it's time for us to focus on quality of education, and nevertheless, private sector is also has played a big role. The American University of Afghanistan, which is
it's a wonderful university.
It's a wonderful university, and no doubt that this will be also this became a target
Yes,
for
I
the
know.
terrorist groups. But then, so the in the first few years, the focus was just to get the habit of learning revived. That was the main focus. Now we have to focus on quality of education, and also in terms of vocational training.
Yes.
Because this is one of the areas that is still a country which unemployment is one of the main challenges.
Yes.
We are short of skilled labor. As we develop the mining sector, we need to establish institutes.
Yes.
And we're talking about railway. So at the moment, for example, dozens of Afghan students are learning in Turkmenistan, one of our neighboring countries, in railway.
Running a railway, how to run a railway.
How to run a railway, which was not an idea in the past, because there was no railway. So it's in these, and also to bring the focus. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry. That was to get your sympathy, not to.
You have my sympathy.
Not to bring you difficult questions.
At Thanksgiving. You know I'm going to give that answer at Thanksgiving.
And so it's in these areas, in the areas that we have comparative advantage.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Dr. Abdullah, you've been very generous with your time. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here. I have a request of the audience, which is that Dr. Abdullah needs to, when he walks out, I need you all to stay seated when he walks out, and he needs to be able to walk through this pathway unimpeded, please. You know I generally do Q&A, but I think in this instance we're not going to do that. But I have one last question for you, Dr. Well, first of all, I hope you're going to come back and visit us at CSIS soon.
Absolutely.
And you know we believe in what you're trying to do, and we wish you absolutely the very best.
Thank you.
I would like you to leave this audience with what you're most optimistic about in Afghanistan, about Afghanistan's future.
I'm most optimistic about the future of this country when I see the younger generation. Their energy, their aspirations, their resilience, talent, forward-looking, talented, forward-looking, resilient boys and girls, younger generation, sometimes in the hardest circumstances, making the right efforts for themselves, for their families, and for their country. That makes me hopeful. At the same time, being in this and having the support of the American people in being together with it has helped all of us to be more powerful.
Dr. Abdullah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Abdullah. What an honor. Thanks a lot. You're great. What an honor. You can count on us. We'll help you.